So it's been actually great to be here for this inaugural peace and security dialogue. And there's an amazing group of people. I mean, there's you, former Deputy President of South Africa, President Mbeki. We also have Prime Minister Malik, number of foreign ministers, but there's practitioners and academics in this area, people who've really been working consistently around it. So we've seen a number of issues raised, some of it quite provocative, of course, but dealing with the question. And I think my takeout from yesterday was the acknowledgement that Africa confronts a myriad of problems, but the real issue is how are we really going to overcome this? And the fact that there's clearly gaps in the AU peace and security architecture. And we see this at the moment. There's also the big issue that the focus today is on West Africa and looking at Sudan. But I wonder, I mean, your own thoughts just listening this morning.
Yeah, indeed. This is an interesting group. It's kind of like an idea whose time has come.
Absolutely.
Because in a number of platforms where peace and security in Africa is being discussed, it is not the Africans who are thought leaders. We are sort of joining other people who are talking about us. And I think right now it is a very big moment for us as we deal with these big industrial revolution issues, which are very much drivers of conflict. If I think of the issue of the strategic minerals that will power the clean energy and the many other products that are on high demand in the world, those minerals are in Africa. I worry about the fact that in most African countries, they are not necessarily owned by African entrepreneurs and African governments. And yet, these are minerals that are to do or die for the future of Africa. So it is really an issue that at a coherent AU needs to be discussed, because we need an African strategy so that it does not drive us to another conflict. Because unlike the previous industrial revolutions, maybe it's the same. We fought to the extent that we did. We don't want to get into other big fights if we can avoid it. And we also don't want not to own our own minerals because we need them. So this is just one big chunk of issues that looms large in the debate about peace and security. And this group is a very big group. I mean, it's a very important group, yes, to really provide guidance on how we get our leaders on this continent to be seized with this matter.
Yeah. I actually want to pick up the to do or die for. Because at the moment, if we look at the countries where we find these rare earth minerals, there's more a sense of dying. Precisely as you say. Jubilating. And this is because of the extent of conflict there. But it's also very clearly linked to external interests, and who is involved around that. So part of the point of this particular conversation is that it's not an event, it's going to be a process. Yes. So this is the first. And last night we made a commitment that's on the first day that we'll be back here in a year's time, and we'd like to see progress in terms of the interventions that we hope to see. And we're very clearly going to link this to the architecture on the continent, the peace architecture on the continent. So this new industrial revolution, or this new revolution around rare earth minerals and so on, we need to ensure that the women, men and the youth are seen as some of the drivers to take this forward. And hence this whole debate earlier today around nationhood was such a intriguing debate. We may not agree with everything raised there.
And the debate about the size of our economies.
Exactly.
Something that we need in our economies is something that will really take our economies to higher states, where our economies can be much bigger than they are now. So we really have to be interested in these debates, because they will determine whether our economies are going to grow or are going to remain the little ones.
Exactly.
The little economies in the whole of Africa to be the size of one country. Come on.
No, we can't. We really can't. And I mean, we always talk about the reality that we have this demographic dividend.
Yes.
The youth.
Which can change things around.
Yes. And yet at the moment, it's not such. I mean, the youth are the ones that are dying in the Atlantic, not in the Atlantic, Mediterranean Ocean. And they need to be involved in turning around our economies. Yeah.
And if they have something meaningful to do in their countries, they wouldn't be leaving.
They wouldn't be leaving.
They would be staying here, and they will be building the countries. And the other issue is women.
Yeah.
In these debates of peace and security, we have to make sure that we discuss where women fit in, given that women carry the brunt of victimization. They are the ones who die in large numbers, even though they are not bearing arms.
Yeah.
It's almost like women and children die in larger numbers than men in combat. Not only do they die, they also are experiencing unspeakable sexual violence, etc. We have to make sure that this pain that women experience is put high on the agenda, so that even when we get to a point where there are peace discussions, we look at how we can make sure that this does not happen again, and how do we redress and make sure that the women can recover from the trauma. Can you imagine how the women in Sudan right now will need to be assisted to recover from the trauma that they've experienced, and in many other countries, as we know. So it's really a difficult discussions in many of these platforms, but we really have to make sure that people have the courage to discuss these issues honestly.
So on that, full agreement around it. And it goes to a point, and I've been using this quite a bit in recent times, that this trauma gets ingrained in our DNA. And it gets passed down intergenerationally.
Exactly.
And hence there is a need for interventions that will deal with it. And it's got to be on the agendas when there's discussions, because the discussions are not about peace and security as a academic or theoretical discussion. It impacts on people, real people, real women and real children. And I'd just like to conclude on a point that I made during the opening. And this is the fact that there's a number of lessons that South Africa and even Namibia can give to the rest of the world. And one such is the systematic hunger and starvation that was imposed on peoples in either countries. And this is not just a lesson for the African continent, but even to Gaza. So when we look at the starvation and hunger of women and children and the way in which there's an attempt to annihilate them, this was sort of played out here. The test, the laboratory was here. But we need to make sure that we don't do this on the rest of the African continent as is happening at the moment.
No, absolutely. And we need, as South Africans, to stay involved on the continent in order to make sure that all the lessons we learned in our struggle is shared, when we also need to learn what these other countries are going through, so that we can see what problems we have now in South Africa, and if there are similarities between what they are experiencing and where we are going. Because you can just sleepwalk into a major conflict. So we really need each other.
Absolutely. And that's why it was good to listen this morning to the defense minister from Rwanda. And he even reflected on what's playing out in the DRC and the history of that conflict. We listened to Mauritania and the minister there. We listened to the former minister from Somalia. And it's just amazing where we have these shared experiences to find common solutions, understanding that they're context specific.
I also thought it was interesting to listen to the ministers of defense talking about conflict, not in terms of what you do with guns, but looking at all the peripheral issues that make conflicts and peace possible, talking about the impact from climate change, talking about the impact of technology, talking about issues of inclusion. And I was very encouraged to listen and to see how broad-minded the people who are handling defense in Africa are. They're not just looking at guns and guns. They are looking at the whole field and what causes these conflicts and what could take us to peace.
I mean, there was one common message, and that was the solution is not through military means. The solution is political. The solution is dialogue. We've got to talk.
And let's solve these problems we have. Corruption came up a lot. Almost all the speakers highlighted corruption as a source of conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big issue since yesterday was leadership.
Leadership.
And ensuring that we have appropriate leadership on the continent.